1874. A handful of painters hang their canvases in a photographer's studio, and a critic names them, as an insult, painters of an impression. 12 years later, they have won. The public loves them. The academy that booed them invites them to dinner. And then they lose the century that should have been theirs, not to the crowd that jeered. To the man who came in right behind them, saying almost nothing. Over the next hour, I will show you the two roads out of Impressionism. One was built on science, on a system of fixed rules that every painter would follow, and it walked straight into a wall. The other was built by men who wanted one thing back, an idea worth painting. You will meet a recluse who reduced the world to a cylinder, a sphere, a cone. He handed Picasso the 20th century. And a preacher who painted a sower, a reaper, a field of crows. He put the whole of life and death inside them. By the end, you will look at a plain landscape and read a man off it. First, understand what they got right, because they got a lot right. These painters stopped scolding the world and started admiring it. Bright, cheerful, a little in love with an ordinary afternoon. They taught you to value a single moment, a sunny day, the rain against the glass, a boat race on the river you would have walked straight past. And they found beauty where no one had thought to look for it, the industrial city, the railway station. Stand in front of one of these and you can almost hear the whistle and smell the smoke and soot off the tracks, a priceless exact picture of Paris life. It was a revolution in how the paint went on the canvas. Broken strokes, pure color laid side by side. At first the critics laughed. Your wallpaper, they said, looks more finished than this. Loose, quick, unserious. Sketches somebody had forgotten to finish. Then, by the end of the decade, the mockery flipped completely. The same academic painters who had jeered were now hanging their work beside them at the official salon. One critic caught the moment perfectly. Impressionism is tidying itself up and pulling on its gloves. Soon it will be invited to formal dinners. And soon enough it was. So this is a happy story, except it is not. The louder the public cheered, the sharper the criticism grew. And the hardest blow came from inside the room. One of their own, Gauguin, looked at their canvases and said this: what they paint is tied to the eye, not to the mysterious depths of thought. Their art is shallow, too frivolous, too material. There is no idea in it. There were 3 cracks in the movement. Here is the first. They only ever showed you the sunny side, not the Franco-Prussian War, not the political storms, not the money panic tearing France apart in those years. Look at a Monet and you would think life in Paris was one long, bright holiday. It was anything but. There was one exception, and only one worth naming. The gas painted the absent drinkers, the late cafes, people living somewhere past good and evil. But you can count those pictures on one hand. Almost nobody else in the group would go anywhere near the dark. The second crack is the one Gauguin was naming. No symbolism, no hidden meaning. For centuries, a serious painting had to be decoded, read against the life of the whole society. Not here. The red boats are there for the red boats, or to show how the light keeps shifting their colors through the day. Nothing waiting underneath. And that emptiness is exactly why the next generation could not stay inside it. They started with Impressionism, the way you learn a language. They took the light. They took the color. Then, fast, they walked straight out of it, each into something of his own. The third crack, and it is the strangest. There was never a system. There was barely even a movement. These painters worked nothing alike. Different subjects, different hands, and the distance between them was enormous. They simply hung their work in the same room once, and the hostile critic gave the whole lot a name. That is the entire story behind the word. And they knew it. By the late 1870s, they were fighting about it in the Café Gerbois in Paris. Arguments that ended with a slammed door. Degas wanted to work indoors, from photographs. The others said the entire point was to stand outside and paint the thing in front of you. They could not even agree on what they were. So out of those 3 cracks came 2 answers. Both kept the word Impressionism inside their names, so neither one was throwing it away. One set out to repair it with a system, a fixed set of rules that every painter could follow. The other set out to hand-painting back the one thing it had lost, a lofty idea. So they had won the room and lost the argument. 2 roads led out of that studio. One promised to turn painting into a science, and I want to walk that one first, because it ends at the wall. 1886. The last Impressionist show that would ever be held, 2 younger men carrying their canvases. And the painters who had just spent a decade being laughed out of Paris refused to hang beside them. So the new work is taken into a separate room, and a curtain is drawn across it. The man who let these 2 in is Camille Pissarro. The 2 are Georges Seurat and Paul Signac. The whole new movement is just the 2 of them. The public took them even harder than it had taken the Impressionists. And that is saying something. Impressionism, by now, was an evil people had learned to live with, the lesser evil. What hung behind that curtain was the greater one. Same wall, worse verdict. The old evil people could bear. This new one, they could not. So what exactly were they looking at? 2 things set their teeth on edge. First, the stillness. Every figure looks posed, frozen, arranged, the exact quality Impressionists had spent years running away from. Second, the dots. When you paint an entire canvas in identical little points, every canvas begins to look like the next one. People stood in that room and genuinely could not tell whether they were looking at the work of one painter or 2. It felt less like a painting and more like a machine had done it. Then a kinder critic walked in. Félix Fénéon looked at the same curtained-off wall and saw the opposite of a joke. He saw a line running straight back to Impressionism, and a real wish to renew it, so he gave it a name. Neo-impressionism. Seurat and Signac liked the name, and kept it. Georges Seurat did not get long. He died just past 30 and he left behind only a handful of paintings because the method devoured time by the hour. He wanted the smallest dot his brush could make, with almost no gap between one point and the next. Little pixels, laid down so that at the right distance they would fuse into one solid field of color. Painting like that, up close for years, cost him his eyesight. And he knew exactly what he was after. In his own words, I wanted to make a modern version of an ancient frieze. Not the fleeting moment the Impressionists chased. The reverse of it. Permanence. Look at his crowds and nobody moves. They face you dead on or in strict profile, stiff as mannequins, arranged like a chart of correct behavior. This was painting rebuilt as a science. Optics, physics, the chemistry of pigment. Seurat and Signac studied all of it. Their Bible was a book by Eugène Chevreul on color and how it behaves in the applied arts. They were not out to catch a river at a certain hour. They were running an experiment, and the canvas was the bench. Every dot had a reason a physicist could explain. Here's the experiment. Say you want violet. You do not mix red and blue on the palette. You set a dot of red and a dot of blue side by side on the canvas, and you let them mix inside the viewer's eye, on the retina, nowhere else. They called the method divisionism, from division. Split every complex color into its pure parts. The dots are only the tool. That is why they called themselves divisionists, not pointillists. The idea mattered more than the technique. Now come with me and look at the circus. Count the colors in it. 3. Yellow, blue, red. That is everything Seurat laid on the surface. And yet the shadows are clearly violet. Go looking for that violet on the canvas and you will not find it. It is not there. He builds that violet out of nothing but dots of red and dots of blue, set as tightly together as his hand can manage. Pack them tighter and the violet your eye invents turns deeper and darker. Lean in and it splits back into separate points. step back to the right distance, and your own retina paints the color he never touched. Do it with pure points like this, and the whole surface seems to catch light, as if the picture were glowing from the inside. And this is the discovery that outlives everything else in the room. A picture works on you not only through its subject, but through the sheer character of the line and the color. It works before you have consciously understood the thing in it. Even Van Gogh and Gauguin would talk about it. And the painters of the next century run with it. Kandinsky throws the subject out. Malevich and Mondrian follow. If a line already carries meaning, why paint a thing at all? So why did almost no one follow this road? Because the method itself is the wall. Watch what happens when Seurat paints a canton. Kicking dancers, the loudest joy in Paris. Under all those patient dots, the joy sets like plaster. What you get on the canvas is not joy. It is the sign of joy. A diagram in the place where a feeling should be. The critics found the cruel words for it. The people in these pictures, they said, look bugged with smallpox. The landscapes look scraped together out of confetti, and underneath the mockery sat a real problem. No individuality, no emotion, no movement. It was a true marriage of science and art, built on the newest findings in optics, physics, and the psychology of seeing, and it had nowhere left to go. So the science road dead-ended. It could draw the sign of a feeling, and never the feeling. The other road had no rules at all. It had a man who lived apart from everyone, and painted apples. He was a boy in Aix-en-Provence who knew Latin and Greek and wanted more than anything to be a writer. His closest friend wanted to be a painter. And their two lives came out exactly backwards. The friend went to Paris, got his education, and became Émile Zola, one of the most famous novelists in France. The boy who loved words picked up a brush instead. His name was Paul Cézanne. But before we get to that brush, one question hangs over everything. Why would painters call this one man the father of everything that came after? Start with the road he stepped onto. The Impressionists had painted themselves into a corner. They chased the light on the water and the light in the air, and somewhere in that chase they dropped the lofty idea, the God, in one form or another, that older painting had always carried. And the second group set out to carry it back in. Classic post-impressionism really comes down to three names: Cézanne, Van Gogh, and Gauguin. But here is the strange part. The label is younger than the men who wear it. Nobody said the word post-impressionist while any of them were painting. It arrives in 1910, years later, when an art historian named Roger Fry needed something to call them. He was looking backward, at work that was already finished, at men who never asked for a name. His logic was almost lazy. These painters came after the Impressionists, and they did not look much like them. They all live after the Impressionists, Fry decided, so I will call them post-impressionists. And that is the whole of it. There was no movement here, no shared manifesto, no group that signed anything. Just three men working in the same years who happen to know each other. Stand in front of their canvases and the first thing that hits you is the color. Loud, saturated, and fenced in by a hard line of contour, strongest of all in Gauguin. And the Impressionist light is simply gone. There is no shimmering air, no soft, dissolving shadow. In Gauguin you cannot even tell where the light is coming from, because there are no shadows to tell you. It is flat, deliberate color that never once tried to catch a passing moment. But the real break is underneath the paint. Behind every one of their canvases sits a story, a subject, a meaning, an idea. It runs deeper than the beauty of a moment slipping past. The Impressionists handed you the surface of a single second and called it enough. These three wanted to hand you what the second meant. Not the beauty of a moment slipping away, but the thing that beauty was standing in for. Of the three, one is the hardest and the one art lovers mention least. Cézanne. Ask a room full of people and they will name the other two first. But ask painters and the answer is Cézanne every time. Every one of his contemporaries called him the father of the new art, the modern art. Take this one man out of the story, and the 20th century does not happen. And he fought that whole battle alone. He had a wife and a child, but he barely shared a life with them. They stayed in one town while he went off to paint in the open air for months at a time. When he died completely alone, left by the world and by his own family too. Which brings us back to Zola. The two boys had grown into two men, with almost nothing in common. Different lives, different goals, opposite ideas about art. And then Zola wrote a novel about a painter. He never put Cézanne's name on the page, but everyone knew the painter in the book is a failure. Bad with his wife, bad with his son, unable to reach the public at all. And at the end of the book, the painter kills himself. Cézanne was one of the first people Zola sent the book to. He read it, and he understood at once. This man was him. And he took it as mockery, as an admission that his oldest friend did not believe he was a painter. His friend did not believe anything would ever come of him. So he wrote back one short, polite letter. "Thank you, your book is wonderful, and I do not wish to have anything more to do with you." Their friendship ended on that page. His real teacher was someone else entirely. Camille Pissarro, the same Pissarro who would go on to teach Gauguin. Pissarro put a brush in Cézanne's hand and took him out to paint from nature, the two of them side by side, landscape after landscape after landscape. But at that easel Cézanne was already doing something no impressionist standing beside him could understand. Stand in front of an impressionist landscape. A road runs off into the distance and pulls your eye along with it. Now stand in front of a Paul Cézanne. Your eye hits a house and it stops. Nothing moves. The road leads nowhere. Time has stopped. Cézanne did not begin here. He began as one of them. He talked with the Impressionists, he carried his easel out to plein air beside Camille Pissarro, and the two of them painted the same landscapes side by side. But look at what his brush left behind. The color sits differently. The Impressionists laid their paint in light, floating touches, strokes that seem to hover above the canvas. Cézanne's strokes are heavy. The paint looks like it costs something to set down. It presses on the cloth. It has weight. And it is not the world's color. Whatever shade that house actually was, for Cézanne it turned ochre and green. Those two were his colors, his favorites, and they take over the picture whether the real world agrees or not. So here is the break. The Impressionists painted what they saw. They wanted to hand you the world exactly as it looked that afternoon. Cézanne pushes off from what he sees, and then he leaves it behind. He walks off into constructions of his own that answer to no one but him. And his composition will not let you go. An impressionist opens a panorama and sends your eye down the road into the distance. Cézanne builds a spiral. The picture is an octopus. It takes hold of you and winds you inward, and it never hands you back. The Impressionists were painting today. This light, this hour, gone by evening. Cézanne is painting the opposite of that. A grim eternity. Something fixed that does not change and never will. Not the passing moment, but the thing beneath it that outlasts every afternoon. I would call him the painter of flat depth. So what is flat depth? Cézanne is picking up a question Edouard Manet left on the table. Why fake it? Why spend a whole life pretending a flat cloth is a hole cut in the wall? The old masters did exactly that. He wants to know why we still do. Because think about what a painting really is. It is cloth. A flat piece of cloth pulled tight over a wooden frame. That is the entire object. The depth, the air, the distance. All of it is a trick laid on top. And the trick is old. Ever since Renaissance, painters built that depth on purpose. They blurred the far things into a haze. They ran every line back to a single point. They rounded flat shapes into solid bodies with nothing but light and shadow, and they mastered it. Good enough that you forgot. You stood in front of the canvas and stopped seeing cloth at all. You saw a window, an opening onto some other, more perfect world. That was the whole point. The painting lied to you, and you thanked it for the lie. You forgave it because the lie was beautiful. Cézanne says stop. Go back to the beginning. A painting is a surface. It is flat. So the task is not to counterfeit the third dimension. The task is to take a world that has real depth and translate it honestly onto a plane. So he will not paint a tree standing ground in space. He makes a flat print of it, as if he took the tree itself, dipped it in paint, and pressed it against the white cloth like a stamp. What lands there is not the tree. It is the mark of the tree. That is what his canvases are, not the things themselves. A diagram of the world we live in, spread out flat. The plan, not the place. The map, and never the ground it covers. And here is the strange part. He reaches for the same tool the old masters used, color perspective. Warm tones pull toward you, cool tones pushed back. Leonardo da Vinci did it. Cézanne does it too. But stand in front of the result, and the depth never opens. It stays shut. You always know what you are looking at. A flat canvas, filled with patches of blue and yellow and green. The space never fools you for a second. There is no window here, and he does not want one. And for Cézanne, that is exactly where the beauty is. The honesty is the point. Look at the Château de Meudon. Watch the strokes change from plane to plane. Flat here, slanting there, standing upright behind. Every tool for building depth is in his hand, and still no depth opens. The trees do not fall back. They stand up in a row and make a wall. So look again. A flat wall of trees, and houses and woods, every object pressed onto one plane. That is the whole of Cézanne. He thinks like an abstract painter, born 20 years too early. And abstraction is the one word he can never let himself say. Look at these apples. He's painting them, but that is not what he means. In his own mind, Paul Cézanne is an abstract painter, born 20 years too early to be allowed one. He cannot drop the apple. The century will not let him. So he hides the abstraction inside the apple and paints the same objects from three sides at once. So what is he after? Not fruit. Cézanne is hunting for the first element, the thing that every object on this planet can be boiled down to. And for him, that thing is geometry, the alphabet the whole visible world is spelled from. A mountain collapses into a pyramid, into a cone. An apple is a sphere. A jug is a cylinder. Reduce the world far enough, he believes, and you are left with a handful of solid shapes. Now, come close to one of his still lifes. Tell me what fruit that is. You think apples, then you hesitate. A couple of them look like peaches. One could be a quince. You genuinely cannot tell, and Cézanne does not want you to. Which fruit sits in that bowl was the least interesting question in the room to him. And that breaks a promise every still life used to make. You expect the bowl of fruit to be about the fruit, the ripeness, the shine, the thing you could reach in and bite. Stand in front of an old Dutch or Flemish table and your mouth actually waters. Stand in front of Cézanne and nothing happens. It is delicious as form and color. As food, it is dead. Because what he's weighing is never taste. It is form, how a round shape sits beside a longer one. How that same curve runs up against the hard angles of the table. He's not comparing an apple to a pear. He is comparing a curve to a corner and asking which one the picture needs. Beauty for him is a question of shapes fitting shapes. And here is the small confession that gives him away. Real apples rot. They are unreliable models, and he had no patience for waiting on them. So he painted from dummies instead. A dummy is just a little ball. It can stand in for any round fruit you please, because the fruit was never the model. The ball was. Cézanne had a rule behind all of this. Paint not only the nature you can see, but the nature you know. In his lifetime, it was becoming clear that sight barely lives in the eye. The picture is assembled here, at the back of the skull, inside the brain. The eye only gathers the light. The mind decides what the thing actually is. So he paints the object the way the mind holds it, not the way a single eye frames it. Look at that table once more. One piece of it you are seeing from above. Another stands square, straight in front of you. A third leans in from the side. 3 viewpoints at the same moment on one flat canvas. Your 2 eyes could never gather it that way at once. His painting can. And then the space itself begins to slide. Is that a vase standing on the table? Or a shape woven into the wallpaper behind it? Is that a wall, a window, a strip of garden? You often cannot say. Cézanne wants the picture to stop taking orders from the world of things. It turns into its own space, whole and self-governing, built to its own laws. Still life, landscape, portrait. It makes no difference what he paints. Which turns cruel when the subject is his own wife. He painted Madame Cézanne again and again. Read those portraits honestly, and they are not a declaration of love. They are closer to grounds for divorce. The woman barely interests him. She was simply nearby, within reach. A model who happened to be standing there. What holds him is how her rounded shoulders answer the back of the chair, how that shimmering gray plays against the red. And in Woman with the Coffee Pot, he stops even pretending. The message to her is almost brutal. Look at the coffee pot beside you. That is the form worth reaching for. The pot is perfect. It is the most beautiful shape in the room, and it is not the woman. To him, it is the most pleasing form he can point at, and he wants her to reach for it. You want to know how little the person counted. A collector named Ambroise Vollard once sat for him. The session dragged on and on. Vollard nodded off and tipped clean out of the chair onto the floor. Cézanne was not worried about the man. He was furious about the broken pose. Be like an apple, he snapped. Does an apple move? This is the whole creed. A painting speaks in color, in line, in brush stroke, and that language is the painting itself. Stare long enough at his mountain and the outline melts. Your eye drops into the strokes, little mosaic tiles of yellow and green and blue. Everything else, the illusion of depth, the imitation of a subject, Cézanne treats as a lie. Cézanne writes a single line to a young painter. Treat nature by the cylinder, the sphere, and the cone. That young painter was Pablo Picasso, and he took the line and ran with it. In 1907, there is Cubism. Many people call Cézanne its father, though he never once painted a Cubist canvas. He only unlocked the door and stepped aside. Take Cézanne away, and there is no Cubism. He came to painting at 27, and he was dead at 37. 10 years. That is the whole working life of Vincent van Gogh. And for the first 6 of those years, he would not even call himself a painter. Painters, he said, were men like Rembrandt, like Caravaggio, the great masters. So who was he? Before the brush, he made his living selling other men's pictures. Then he preached. That is the man who finally picks up a brush at 27, certain that a painter is someone else, someone enormous, and he himself is nobody. And when he finally does paint, he paints peasants. For 5 or 6 of his 10 years, nothing but peasants, dark kitchens, heavy working hands, potatoes under one bare lamp. That is the world of a canvas like The Potato Eaters. No color yet, no sun, just the poor painted plainly. So he goes to Paris. That is 1886, and Paris is where everything is happening at once. He has come out of those dark Dutch rooms, and now the whole city is color. He walks straight into neo-impressionism, into pointillism, into pictures built out of thousands of tiny separate dots. And he tries it. He lays down the dots himself. And in Paris the Van Gogh you know finally arrives. The bright, violent color. He calls himself a wild colorist, and he means every word of it. But hold on to one thing. That style opened up only after 6 years of work. He had almost run out of time before he found the thing we now call him for. So look at the sower at sunset. One man walking a field, scattering seed. A huge low sun going down behind him. Now, is this the work of a realist? Because Van Gogh started as one. And you will say no, it is not. And you will be right. A real sowing takes a whole crew, and he leaves one man alone in the field. He strips the whole scene down to almost nothing. One sower, one lilac field, one disk of sun sinking behind him. And he does that because for Van Gogh, the sower is not a sower at all. He is a symbol, the one who walks straight out of the gospel parables, a herald of something new. He is not painting a field. He is painting an idea and dressing it as a field. Now look at the man's own colors. They are the colors of the wheat, as if the sower were made of the crop he is throwing. And behind him, the field is already green, already coming up in rows. He is only now casting the seed, and the harvest is already standing there. Van Gogh bends time itself, so the sower can see the fruit of his own hands. And then there is that sun. For Van Gogh, the sun is never just weather, it is the source of life. It is a god, he says, one that hands out life and takes it back again. Think about what that does to the picture. The field is no longer just a field. It is the place where God deals out life, one handful of seed at a time. And he was not the only one who saw it that way. At an exhibition in 1889, a critic named Albert Aurier stood in front of this sower and called him a messiah. A sower of truth, Aurier wrote, one who would renew our tired industrial world and renew our art along with it. And you can push it one step further. You can stand in front of that sower and see Van Gogh himself, a man who came to painting late, with only 10 years in hand. And he meant to renew art and culture with nothing but his own two hands. The herald in the field is a self-portrait. But here is the thing about Van Gogh. Like Cézanne before him, he thinks in cycles. He goes back to the same subject again and again, not to copy it, but to turn it over, to find the other side of it. So, he did not paint the sower once. He came back to it again and again. And the second sower is no herald at all. Put the two side by side. The first one throws light, dressed in the color of the wheat. The second is dark, bowed, emptied out. He casts the seed the way a machine would, with no faith left in the gesture. It is the same field, the same act, the same sun. Only the meaning has turned over. If the first man promises life, this one promises death. And look what the sun does now. Behind this dark man's head, it stops being the sky and quietly turns into a halo. Van Gogh has walked all the way out of the real world and into metaphor. I want to paint men and women, he wrote, with something of the eternal in them, the thing the halo once stood for. Only now he hunts for that eternity in the vibration and glow of the color itself. And that is the whole move. Take the plainest peasant subject there is, a man in a field, then carry through it the eternal themes that used to belong to religious painting, to crucifixions and descents from the cross. That is how a preacher with a brush turns a peasant into a god. If the sower is the beginning of life, Van Gogh needed its opposite in the same field. He found it in the man with the scythe. Look at the man with the scythe. The reaper, Van Gogh says in his own words, is death, and humanity is the wheat that is reaped. And yet there is nothing sad in this field. It all happens under a sun the color of red gold. You expect death in a painting to be dark, a shadow, a bare tree, a cold gray light. Van Gogh does the opposite. He floods the field with gold and calls the death in it good. To see why, you have to follow how he thought about the whole world. He needed the opposite of the sower, and he built it into the same ground. Where Van Gogh puts a sower, the symbol of something being born, there has to be a reaper too. Birth in one canvas, its ending in the next. So, he painted a whole run of these. Not one reaper, but a series about the harvest. The fields being cut, the crop brought in, the stooped work of gathering it all before the season turns. But his real subject is bigger than any one harvest. One of the main themes in all of Van Gogh is cosmological, the laws that run the universe. And the first of those laws, for him, is the cycle. He sees a life as a loop, not a line. Death is not where it stops. It stops nowhere, because a new generation comes after you, and another after that, and each one walks further along than you could. So for him, death is natural, and it is good. When you go, you clear the road, you make room for new people, for the generations behind you, and they are further along than you ever were. And you are not erased. You stay in history through your ideas. Leave something behind for the ones who come after. You have not gone without a trace. You have given them soil to grow in. That is how one age hands itself to the next, one culture, one tradition at a time. The brightest painting he ever made on this one idea, and he said so himself, is that grape harvest at Arles, the Red Vineyard. It hangs today in the Pushkin State Museum of Fine Arts. Here is a number worth holding. The Red Vineyard sold at the show in 1889. The price was 400 francs, cheap for a canvas of that size. In those same years, a Millet was going for 800,000. 800,000 against 400. Van Gogh was nowhere near that yet. But not for long. By the early 1900s, the collector Morozov was buying his canvases for thousands of gold rubles. The same hand. Thousands in gold. So how do you read a Van Gogh? 3 things. The color, first. Then the brushstroke. Then the picture-forming motif, the one element that pulls the whole canvas onto itself. In the Red Vineyard, that motif is the sun, a disc heated white sending down its golden rays in ring after concentric ring, and everything in the picture is dragged toward it. Follow it. The wet road after the rain runs toward the sun like lava. The horizon line leans the same way. Even the crowns of the trees, painted a strange blue, reach for it. And you look down on the whole scene, level with the low, sinking sun. Then the shape of those rays starts repeating. A wheel is the same arc. A Japanese parasol is the same arc. And the bent backs of the women picking grapes are that arc once more, curving under the same sun. Now, the color. It is the color of fire, the color of a house going up. The center of the canvas is that blaze, where everything dissolves and burns. The vines are caught in it with the rest. And the fire has stages. In the distance it is only catching a young golden flame. In the foreground it is already spent, blue and green and gray. That is the ash, the part that has finished burning. The blaze starts far off and dies at your feet. So the sun here is a god. It gives life, it pulls everything back into itself, and it takes life away. Under its rays the whole of nature burns down. Then it returns, because winter passes, spring comes and everything blooms again. And in that same fire the man burns too. Day after day of labor in the field, a human life smolders down together with the life of the land. The grape pickers are not watching the cycle from outside, they are inside it. But this is the good death. The grapes are cut, the vines sleep through the winter and they come back as wine. And wine for a Christian is communion. Van Gogh was a religious man, so under the natural cycle he laid a Christian one. Nobody leaves without a trace. But a wheat field cannot tell you it is thinking about God. To hear that, you have to read his own words. And to see it, look at what he did instead of painting his own face. Instead of a face lined with everything he had lived through, Vincent van Gogh paints his boots, worn, cracked, walked almost to death. Look at them long enough, and you know the road the man came down and what every mile of it cost him. Because his painting is always a kind of philosophy. That sounds heavy for a man who mostly painted fields and chairs in the sky. But it is true. Even when you cannot see it at first, the canvas can look like a plain, quiet landscape. But there is a thought hidden under the paint. And the way in is almost always the same. You read his letters. The writing is where the paintings finally explain themselves. Without the letters, half of what he made stays a pretty surface. You walk straight past, never guessing what he actually put there. And we can still read them for one small reason. Van Gogh left descendants only through his brother, Theo. Theo's wife and their son, the painter's own nephew, made it their life's work. They gathered the letters, they published them. They opened the museum in Amsterdam that carries his name to this day. So take one of the simplest things he ever painted. Starry night over the Rhone. On the face of it, nothing happens here. He is somewhere in a southern town. One evening he walks out, stops on a bridge, looks up into a sky full of stars, and paints exactly that. And it does look that easy. A man, a bridge, a clear night, and a brush. But no, nothing with him is ever that easy. And you only feel it once you know what he wrote to his brother standing under the very sky. Every time I see the stars he wrote, I begin to dream. The way a train carries us across the land, death carries us to the stars. While we are alive, we cannot set out for a star, just as, once dead, we cannot board a train. Cholera, syphilis, consumption, cancer are nothing but the heavenly means of transport. And then, the line that finishes it. A natural death from old age, he wrote, is the same as making the journey on foot. The stars are where he is going. The illness is only the fast way there. Old age is the slow walk. So look at that dark river one more time. Even when he shrugs and calls it an ordinary starry night, it is a night that hides a question about how the whole world is put together, about life and death, about happiness and what a single person is even doing here on the earth. Which is why I keep coming back to the boots. He does not give you the face, the deep wrinkles, the eyes that have seen too much of the world. He gives you two worn shoes sitting on the floor, and standing in front of them, you can say it plainly, without stretching a thing. This is a self-portrait. Those boots tell you as much about him as any face ever could. The distance the man covered, everything his feet went through, what he was carrying while he walked, and what he could not put down. A portrait shows you who someone is. These show you where he has been, and what the walking did to him. This is one of the strangest things about the way he paints. You can pour yourself into anything at all. You do not have to sit down and paint your own face. You can paint a table, a chair, a bed, and the thing still carries your character, your mood, the state you are in. He proved it with one quiet trick, and it still makes me smile. On his canvases, he paints two men at the same time, and neither of them is a man. A plain wooden chair is his own portrait. A heavier, richer armchair stands in for Gauguin. Look at his own chair first. It is light, simple, easy to understand. It sits in plain daylight, open, turned toward whoever walks up to it. That is how he saw himself. Nothing hidden, nothing locked away. Now the other one. The armchair is proud. A little bit of a snob, it turns its nose up. It sits there at an angle, leaning back, not quite facing you, deciding for itself who it lets come close. And he paints that armchair at dusk in the failing white. The two of them had lived under one roof for months, side by side, every day. But Gauguin was still a riddle to him. Unknown. Never fully worked out. A dark horse he could sit beside for a whole season and still not name. So, if a chair can be a portrait, a landscape can be a confession. Van Gogh paints one more field. It is the last painting we have left to look at. A landscape for this man is also a portrait. You watched him do it with a chair, with a pair of worn-out boots left on a bare floor. He pours himself into objects. He pours himself into places in exactly the same way. So a field, for him, is never only a field. And here is what still unsettles me. Hand me one of his landscapes with nothing attached. No letter, no date, no story behind it. I can still tell you, almost to the day, what state he was in when he stood there. So look at this one. This is wheat field with crows. Do not lean on the title. Step near and let the field tell you what kind of day it was before I say one word about it. Start with the ground. A road runs straight into the wheat and breaks off in the middle. It leads nowhere. On both sides, golden ears, thick and heavy, pressed together, and over all of it crows, not circling high up, low, coming in low across the field straight toward you. Now the color. The yellow does not sit on the surface, it burns from the inside. The ears of wheat curl and twist like snakes. They pull you down into the canvas whether you want to go or not. Then the sky, a blue-black with no morning in it. Even the temperature is wrong. And here is my reading, for what it is worth. Every part of the picture is pulling in a different direction at once. The road quits. The birds press down. The wheat drags you inward. The sky sits on top of it all like a lid. It is not a view. It is a state of mind that happened to have a field in front of it. No face anywhere. And you know exactly what he felt. You probably think the story ends here. Impressionism wins. It does not end here. Now go all the way back to where this began. A studio, 1886, the 8th and last Impressionist show. And hanging in the same rooms, a younger crowd, the neo-impressionists, brought in by Camille Pissarro, the painters who had finally won and then lost the century. Here's who takes it from them. Not the men with the dots. Look hard at one of those canvases, built from thousands of tiny points of pure color set side by side. The technique is dazzling. The discipline is total. But step back and something is gone. You do not feel joy. You get the sign of joy, spelled out and arranged. That is the dead end waiting at the far side of the method. They drew the sign of a feeling, and never once the feeling itself. It was the recluse instead, Paul Cézanne, who stared at one mountain for years, until he stopped seeing a mountain and saw a shape, a cone. He said the whole of nature could be built from three solids, the cylinder, the sphere, and the cone. A young painter heard that one sentence and never recovered. His name was Pablo Picasso, and out of it came Cubism. Without Cézanne, there is no Cubism at all. And this man, Vincent van Gogh, whose field has no face in it, and still tells you everything a face could. Two quiet men, working alone, at the edge of a movement that had just triumphed. One handed painting a new geometry. The other handed it back its nerve. Between the two of them, they own the century that follows. Not the crowd, not the method. These two. So that is the secret these paintings keep, and it is not better light. It is not prettier weather or a cleverer brush. It is a reason to look. Each of these men found a way to press a whole inner life onto a flat cloth, and to make you feel it standing there. Take that idea back out of painting, and the century that follows has nothing to stand on. And if this is your kind of thing, subscribe.